Our marriage was never about love, it was about convenience. She needed a wife to silence rumors about her personal life and secure a massive business merger. I needed the money to save my family's collapsing bookstore. Simple. Clean. No strings attached. Or so I thought. When I first met her, Alexandra Monroe didn't smile. She didn't need to. Her confidence filled the room like a storm about to break. A tall, elegant woman in a tailored suit that probably cost more than my car, she had that cold arrogance of someone who'd never heard the word no. Her voice was low, smooth, and commanding when she said, "You'll be well compensated for your cooperation, Miss Hart." At that moment, I should have felt small. But I didn't. Something about her, the way her sharp eyes lingered just a second too long on my lips, the faint curve of a smirk, made my pulse skip. I told myself it was intimidation, not attraction. After all, she was a millionaire. Untouchable. Impossible. We signed the papers 2 weeks later in her office overlooking the city skyline. A lawyer witnessed our union, and within minutes, I became Mrs. Alexandra Monroe, the woman behind the most talked-about power figure in New York. Our deal was clear. We'd live together, attend public events, and play the perfect couple. But behind closed doors, we'd remain strangers. The first night I moved into her penthouse, I realized how surreal it all was. The walls gleamed with art worth more than my entire life savings. Everything was pristine, lifeless, like her. Yet, every time she looked at me, something flickered behind her controlled expression, a spark she tried to hide. Dinner that night was quiet. She sat across from me, scrolling through her phone as I pushed food around my plate. "You don't have to look so tense," she said suddenly without looking up. "This isn't a prison." I raised an eyebrow. "Feels like one." Her eyes lifted to meet mine, a ghost of amusement playing on her lips. "Then you haven't seen what I can make a prison look like." It was a joke, but her tone made me shiver. There was danger in her words, yes, but also something magnetic. As days passed, I learned her moods like clockwork, the way she'd sip her morning coffee while reading financial reports, the faint scent of her perfume that lingered long after she left a room. And though our relationship was meant to be fake, every accidental brush of her hand, every shared glance across a crowded room started to feel real. I told myself not to fall, not to let my heart betray the deal. But every time she called my name, every time her voice softened for just a second, it became harder to remember where the act ended and where the truth began. And deep down, I think she felt it too. It started subtly, like a whisper you almost miss. A touch on the arm that lingered a second too long, a stolen glance that spoke louder than words. Alexandra was a fortress, always composed, always in control, but when we were alone, her walls began to tremble. We had to attend a charity gala together one evening, our first public appearance as Mrs. and Mrs. Monroe. The air inside the ballroom was thick with perfume, money, and judgment. She held my hand as we walked in, her fingers warm, her grip steady. To everyone else, she was the picture of calm confidence, but I could feel the tension beneath her skin. "You look stunning," she said quietly as we posed for photos. Her tone was casual, but her eyes, dark, intent, betrayed something else. "Don't sound so surprised," I teased, trying to hide how her words made my heart race. "I'm not surprised," she murmured. "Just distracted." For a moment, the world around us faded. The chatter, the flashing cameras, the music, it all blurred into the background. There was only her gaze, sharp and unguarded, like she was seeing me for the first time. That night, after the gala, she poured us both a glass of wine. The penthouse lights were dim, city lights spilling across the floor-to-ceiling windows. She loosened her tie, her jacket discarded carelessly on the sofa. I'd never seen her look so uncomposed, so human. "You did well tonight," she said, voice softer than usual. "The press loved us." "I didn't know this marriage came with performance reviews," I replied, smiling. Her lips curved slightly. "Everything in my world does." She moved closer, close enough that I could see the faint gold flecks in her brown eyes. "You're different from what I expected," she said after a pause. "You're not afraid of me." Should I be? Her smile deepened, but it didn't reach her eyes. Everyone is. Something in her tone, quiet, almost lonely, hit me unexpectedly. I realized then that beneath her arrogance and authority was a woman used to being obeyed, but never truly seen. Over the following weeks, the lines of our arrangement began to blur. She'd ask about my day, about the bookstore I left behind, about my favorite books. Small things, but they mattered. One evening, she found me reading in the living room, curled up on the couch. She stood silently for a moment, watching. Then she said, "You make this place feel less empty." I didn't know how to respond. All I knew was that something between us was changing. What began as a deal now felt like a slow unraveling of everything she tried to keep hidden and everything I swore I wouldn't feel. And when she brushed her fingers against mine that night, it wasn't part of the act anymore. Weeks turned into months, and our lives began to blend in ways I hadn't expected. What started as a staged partnership now had real laughter, real arguments, and moments that left my heart racing long after she'd left the room. Alexandra Monroe, the woman who once treated me like a transaction, was slowly, unwillingly, becoming someone I couldn't imagine my days without. She'd begun joining me for breakfast, something she used to skip. One morning, I found her in the kitchen wearing a loose white shirt, sleeves rolled up, her hair slightly undone. She was trying and failing to make pancakes. Flour dusted her hands, and there was a small frown on her face. "You look like someone who's never done this before," I teased, crossing my arms. She turned, arching an eyebrow. "I run a multi-billion-dollar company. I can handle a frying pan." The next second, a puff of smoke rose from the pan, and I laughed. She tried to hide a smile, but failed. It was one of the first times I'd seen her laugh, really laugh, and something in me melted. "Fine," she said, handing me the spatula. "You win. Save breakfast before I burn down the penthouse." I took over, and as I worked, I could feel her eyes on me. Her gaze wasn't businesslike anymore. It was soft, curious, lingering. When I looked up, our eyes met, and the silence that followed felt heavy, electric. "Why are you looking at me like that?" I asked. Her answer was quiet, but honest. "Because I can't stop." My breath caught. For a second, I forgot that this marriage wasn't real, that love wasn't supposed to be part of the arrangement. But as she stepped closer, tucking a loose strand of hair behind my ear, reality blurred. She hesitated, her hand still near my face. "You make it hard to remember what this was supposed to be," she whispered. I didn't trust my voice, so I said nothing. But I didn't move away either. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every word, every look replayed in my mind. I'd tried so hard to keep my heart guarded, but Alexandra was breaking through every wall I built. And the worst part? I didn't want her to stop. Days later, she invited me to accompany her on a business trip to Italy. "You're my wife, after all," she said with that half smile that always made my stomach twist. It was the first time I realized she didn't just want me there for the cameras. On the flight, she sat beside me, her hand occasionally brushing against mine. It wasn't deliberate, but every touch sent shivers through me. Somewhere over the Atlantic, I stopped pretending that this was just a deal. Because pretending had started to feel real. And I wasn't sure either of us knew how to turn back. Florence was painted in gold that evening, the kind of city that made you forget who you were before you arrived. We stayed in a private villa overlooking the Arno River, the kind of place that whispered romance even when you tried to ignore it. Alexandra had business meetings during the day, but at night, she was mine, or at least, I wanted to believe she was. That night, she came back late, her hair slightly tousled, exhaustion softening her usually perfect posture. "Long day?" I asked, setting down my book. She sighed, unbuttoning her blazer. "Investors," she muttered. "They always think they know better." I stood and walked toward her, offering a small smile. "Maybe they're just intimidated by you." Her lips curved into that dangerous smirk I was beginning to crave. "You think I'm intimidating?" "I think you like being intimidating," I replied, half teasing, half truthful. She stepped closer, her perfume a subtle mix of cedar and something darker. "And you," she murmured, "you like challenging me." Before I could answer, her hand brushed against mine, then lingered. The air between us thickened. My pulse quickened as she studied my face, her gaze darting between my eyes and my lips like she was fighting a silent war with herself. "Alexandra," I whispered, not sure if it was a warning or a plea. She didn't move away. "Tell me to stop," she said, her voice low and unsteady, an unfamiliar sound for someone always in control. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I reached up, my fingers tracing the sharp line of her jaw, the warmth of her skin. Her breath hitched, and in that moment, the walls we'd built, her arrogance, my caution, the entire lie of our arrangement, crumbled into something painfully real. She kissed me softly at first, almost hesitant, as if testing the truth of it. Then again, deeper, until my heart raced so fast it felt like it might burst. It wasn't a kiss of possession or power, it was one of surrender. When we finally pulled apart, she looked at me like she was seeing the world for the first time. "This wasn't supposed to happen," she whispered. "I know," I said, breathless. "But it did." She exhaled, her forehead resting against mine. "You're ruining my perfectly structured life, you know that?" I smiled faintly. "Maybe your life needs a little ruining." We didn't talk much after that. The silence said enough. That night wasn't about the deal, or the money, or the image. It was about two women who had spent too long pretending not to want what they both already did. And though neither of us dared to say it out loud, we both knew that something irreversible had happened. Our fake marriage had just turned into something terrifyingly real. The morning after Florence, everything felt different. The sunlight spilling across the sheets, the quiet rhythm of her breathing beside me, it was too intimate, too genuine for something that had started as a business arrangement. I watched her sleep, her usually sharp expression softened, and for a fleeting moment, she didn't look like the ruthless millionaire everyone feared. She looked like a woman who'd finally allowed herself to feel. When she opened her eyes and saw me watching, her lips curved faintly. "You're staring," she murmured. I smiled. "You make it hard not to." She reached out, her fingers brushing mine. It was a small gesture, but it carried a weight we both understood. Something had shifted, something that couldn't be undone. But Alexandra being Alexandra, she tried to pretend nothing had changed. She went back to work calls and meetings, burying herself in her empire. Yet, between the cracks of her schedule, there were moments she couldn't hide, the way she'd glance at me during dinner, how her hand would linger on my back as we walked through crowded rooms. One evening, we attended another corporate event. Cameras flashed, champagne flowed, and we played our usual roles, the perfect couple. But this time, when her arm wrapped around my waist, it didn't feel staged. It felt possessive. Real. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the silence of the penthouse wrapped around us, I asked, was any of that for show? Her expression faltered for just a second before she looked away. "It's complicated," she said quietly. "No," I replied, stepping closer. "It's simple. Either it means something or it doesn't." She turned toward me, frustration flashing in her eyes. "You think this is easy for me? I built my entire life on control, on keeping people out. And then you walk in and make me feel like I'm losing that control every time I look at you." I swallowed hard, my voice barely above a whisper. Maybe losing control isn't the worst thing. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she crossed the space between us and took my face in her hands. Her kiss was desperate this time, full of all the emotion she tried to bury beneath her pride. When she finally pulled back, her forehead rested against mine. "You have no idea what you're doing to me," she breathed. "Maybe I do," I whispered back. After that night, she stopped pretending. She'd leave me little notes before heading to the office. She'd call during the day just to hear my voice. The woman who once saw love as weakness was slowly unraveling before me, and I was falling for her faster than I could admit. But deep down, I knew that falling for her meant risking everything. Because when someone like Alexandra Monroe lets herself love, she doesn't do it halfway. And I wasn't sure either of us would survive what came next. Love, when it finally came, didn't arrive gently. It crashed into us like thunder, loud, unpredictable, and impossible to contain. Alexandra and I had built our relationship on an illusion, but what grew between us in the quiet moments was real enough to shake both our worlds. We began to share small pieces of ourselves, the fragments we'd hidden from everyone else. She told me about her childhood, how success had become her only escape from loneliness. I told her about my parents' bookstore, how I used to dream of a simple life filled with stories, not scandals. And somehow, between her late-night confessions and my quiet laughter, we became something we couldn't name. But love, especially forbidden love, has a way of drawing attention. Rumors began to spread. The tabloids speculated about our fake marriage, calling it a publicity stunt. Photos of us together, too close, too tender, hit the front pages. Her investors began to question her judgment. The same board that once applauded her brilliance now whispered about her heart. One afternoon, I overheard a conversation I wasn't supposed to. Her assistant's voice carried through the open door of her office. "They're saying your wife is a distraction, Alexandra. Some think she's a liability." I froze. A liability. That word echoed in my head like an accusation. When I confronted her that evening, she didn't deny it. "It's getting complicated," she said, her tone clipped, distant again, the way it was before Florence, before us. "Complicated?" I repeated, trying to steady my voice. "You mean inconvenient?" She turned away, her jaw tightening. "You know it's not like that." "Then what is it like?" I pressed. "Because it feels like you're already choosing between me and your reputation." She said nothing, and the silence between us was louder than any argument. For the first time in months, we slept apart. The next morning, I woke to find her gone, no note, no message, nothing but the faint scent of her perfume on the pillow beside me. Days turned into weeks. The tabloids moved on to new scandals, but I couldn't move on from her. I kept telling myself it was just a contract, just a deal, but every heartbeat told me otherwise. Then, one rainy night, she appeared at my door, soaked from head to toe, eyes filled with something raw and unguarded. "I tried to walk away," she said, her voice breaking. "But I can't. I don't care about the board, the rumors, or the company. She stopped, struggling to find the words. "I just need you to stay." Tears burned in my eyes as I looked at her, the woman who had once been untouchable, now standing before me, shattered by her own heart. Our marriage had started as a deal, a transaction built on lies and convenience. But in that moment, as she stood there begging me to stay, I knew the truth. Some deals end in signatures. Ours ended in surrender. She stood there in the rain, trembling not from the cold, but from the fear of losing what she'd finally dared to feel. The arrogant millionaire who once commanded rooms with a single glance now looked like a woman stripped bare by love. I didn't speak at first. I just watched her, heart torn between anger and longing. Finally, I stepped aside and whispered, "Come in." She hesitated, as if afraid I'd change my mind. But when she stepped through the doorway, I could see how exhausted she was, her eyes red, her hair damp against her face, her confidence replaced with vulnerability. I handed her a towel, and she took it silently, her fingers brushing mine. That small touch unraveled every wall I'd tried to rebuild in her absence. "Why now?" I asked softly. "After everything?" She looked down, her voice quiet but steady. "Because I thought I could live without you. I thought walking away was the smart thing to do. But every day without you felt like I was suffocating. You got under my skin, and I hate that I let you, but I can't fight it anymore." I took a shaky breath. "You hurt me, Alexandra. You made me feel like I was just part of your business plan." She closed her eyes, guilt flickering across her face. "I know. And I hate myself for it. But you changed everything. You made me want things I swore I didn't need: love, closeness, someone who sees me instead of the money or the name. You made me human again." Her words hit harder than I expected. This wasn't the calculated woman I married. This was someone broken open by honesty. "I don't need your money," I said quietly. "I never did. I just needed to know if any of this was real." She took a step closer, her voice trembling. "It's the only real thing I've ever had." Before I could respond, she cupped my face in her hands, her eyes searching mine as if asking permission to hope. And when I didn't pull away, she kissed me softly, desperately, like she was trying to breathe again after being underwater for too long. When we finally parted, she whispered, "Stay." Not because of the contract. Not because of the image. Stay because you love me. I looked at her, the woman who had once been my obligation, my challenge, my undoing, and realized I did. Then end the contract, I said. End the deal. Let's start over. For real. Her eyes softened, and she nodded. Done. That night, we tore up the papers that bound us together for all the wrong reasons. What was left between us wasn't business, wasn't obligation. It was raw, imperfect, and terrifyingly beautiful. For the first time, we weren't pretending to be married. We simply were. And though the world outside might never understand, we finally did. The next morning, the sun broke through the gray clouds like a promise. For the first time since our marriage began, the house felt alive, not polished or controlled, but warm, real, and quietly full of hope. Alexandra brewed coffee herself, though she almost burned the beans, and when I teased her about it, she smiled, the kind of smile that reached her eyes. There was no boardroom, no audience, no contract to perform for. Just us. Two women who had built something real from the ashes of something false. We sat by the window, coffee cups in hand, watching the city below wake up. You know, I said, half joking, most people start with love and then get married. We sort of did it backward. Alexandra chuckled, that low, rich sound that always sent warmth down my spine. Backward suits us, she said. I've never done anything the normal way. She turned to me then, her expression soft, but serious. You could have walked away last night. I would have deserved it. I met her gaze. I almost did. But the truth is, somewhere along the way, you stopped being a deal to me. Her hand reached across the table, finding mine. And you stopped being my escape plan, she said quietly. You became my reason to stay. That day, she called her lawyer and officially ended the contract. Every clause, every legal tie that had once held us together on paper, gone. What remained was choice. A terrifying, beautiful choice. Later that afternoon, she took me to the bookstore I'd left behind months ago. The for sale sign had been taken down. Confused, I looked at her and she smiled. It's yours again, she said simply. I bought it back, but this time, not as a transaction. I wanted to give you back the part of yourself I took when I made that deal. Tears welled in my eyes before I could stop them. You didn't have to. I wanted to, she interrupted softly. Because love isn't about owning or saving someone. It's about giving them space to be who they are and hoping they still choose to share that space with you. I wrapped my arms around her, feeling her heartbeat against mine. It was steady, strong, real. The kind of heartbeat that no amount of money could ever buy. In the weeks that followed, we built something new. She spent weekends at the bookstore with me, pretending to read while secretly watching me work. I'd visit her office sometimes, bringing her lunch just to see the look on her assistant's face when I called her my wife, and this time, it wasn't a lie. Our love wasn't perfect. We argued, we clashed, we drove each other crazy. But it was ours, unwritten, unplanned, and entirely real. And sometimes, when the city lights reflected in her eyes and she whispered my name like it was both a prayer and a promise, I'd think about how it all began, as a deal, a lie, a performance. Now, every moment felt like the truth we'd both been too afraid to believe in. Our marriage was once a contract written in ink. Now, it was a love story written on our hearts.